Every farmer in Hardin County, Iowa had a place where he hid the things that were too broken to fix and too heavy to haul away. A fence corner, a tree line, the back of the barn where the weeds grew high enough to hide the rust. It is one of the quiet embarrassments of farming, the steady accumulation of failure. A cracked plow blade, a blown cylinder, an engine block that seized because someone forgot the oil on the wrong day. Most farmers hated looking at their dead equipment because it reminded them of bad luck and bad decisions, so they pushed it out of sight into a ravine or called the scrap man who paid $8 a ton. But there was one man who did not hate his dead machines. He loved them. He collected them and organized them with the precision of a librarian. And for 20 years, the entire county laughed at him. Let me tell you about Roy Hassel, because to understand how a junkyard saved an entire county, you have to understand the man who built it. Roy was 53 years old in 1966, and he farmed 240 acres on the east side of Hardin County. He had taken over the farm from his father, who took it from his father, making 3 generations of Hassels on the exact same ground. The farm had one unusual feature, which was a steep ravine running along the north boundary. It was 40 feet wide and 20 feet deep, carved by a forgotten creek bed. It was completely useless for planting and too rocky for grazing. Roy's father had used it as a dumping ground for broken machinery, but Roy saw a different kind of potential. The real collection began when a neighbor named Carl Hinton wanted to get rid of an old Farmall 460. The tractor had a cracked engine block, and Carl was going to pay the scrap man to haul it away. Roy asked him to bring it to the ravine instead. Carl looked at him like he had lost his mind, pointing out that the cracked block made the machine absolutely worthless. But Roy explained that he did not want to fix the tractor, he wanted the parts. The hydraulic pump, the power takeoff shaft, the gauges, the seat, the steering column, and the water pump were all perfectly fine. One cracked block did not make the machine worthless. It made 90% of the machine worth saving. Carl delivered the dead tractor that Saturday, and Roy did not just smash it up or leave it to rot in the weeds. He spent the entire weekend carefully disassembling the machine with wrenches and a factory shop manual. He pulled every salvageable part, cleaned it thoroughly, and labeled it using a grease pencil on a strip of masking tape. He wrote down the make, the model, the specific part name, and its condition. He organized everything inside his barn. The hydraulic pump went on a designated shelf, and the fuel injectors went into empty coffee cans. The empty carcass of the tractor frame went down into the ravine, arranged neatly in a row. Roy went one step further and started a detailed ledger. In a simple spiral notebook, he recorded every single part by date of acquisition, the source machine, and its exact location in his barn. He was building a meticulous inventory system for discarded iron. His wife Della watched him carefully labeling brake shoes and warned him that the neighbors were already calling his place a junkyard. She asked him when he was going to stop. Roy simply looked at the dead machines filling the ravine and told her he would stop when he ran out of room, and then he would just start another row. He spent his evenings and his weekends standing in his barn cleaning and sorting the life out of dead metal. By 1970, his notebook held over 400 perfectly cataloged parts, while the whole town wondered why a grown man was turning his farm into a graveyard. Now let me tell you how the county reacted, because the reaction is half the story. Merle Gustafson was the John Deere dealer in Eldora, and he was the first person to make the situation personal. Merle was a salesman to his very core. He firmly believed that the job of an American farmer was to buy equipment, and the job of an American dealer was to sell it. To a man like Merle, Every single used part that Roy pulled from a dead tractor in his ravine was a brand new part that Merle failed to sell. Every farmer who drove their pickup truck to Roy Hassel's barn instead of Merle's shiny showroom was a customer lost. Merle did not say this directly to Roy. Instead, he said it the way small-town businessmen often say things, which is sideways at the local cooperative, loud enough for the right ears to hear. Merle stood at the cooperative counter on a Saturday morning and announced that Roy Hassel was running a junkyard. He claimed he had driven past and counted 14 dead tractors and 6 rotting combines. Merle called the farm an eyesore and a safety hazard. But then he delivered the ultimate insult. He accused Roy of cheating the system. In farm country, cheating the system was a heavy accusation. It suggested that Roy was doing something fundamentally dishonest by helping his neighbors save money on repairs. The men at the cooperative murmured and a few laughed. A couple of men defended Roy quietly, but most stayed completely silent because nobody wanted to cross the most powerful equipment dealer in the county. Merle controlled the service department, and every farmer needed that service department eventually. The situation escalated in 1973 when an anonymous complaint was filed with the county regarding an unlicensed salvage operation on Roy's property. Everyone assumed the complaint came directly from Merle. The county zoning officer, a man named Dale Lundquist, drove out to the farm to inspect the ravine. Dale stood at the edge and looked down at roughly 30 pieces of dead equipment, and then looked into the barn at the meticulously organized shelves. He informed Roy about the complaint. Roy calmly explained that he was not running a commercial salvage yard. He was simply a farmer with a ravine full of broken equipment that other farmers had freely given him. He did not advertise and he did not buy. If a neighbor needed a part, he simply gave it to them or traded for labor. Roy pointed out that Merle charged a massive markup while Roy charged absolutely nothing. Dale Lundquist wrote on his clipboard, found no violation, and drove away. The legal trouble vanished, but the nickname remained permanently. Roy Hassel officially became the Junkyard Farmer. His farm became the junkyard, and his barn became the junk shop. The entire town laughed at him, using his home as a landmark by telling people to turn left at the junkyard. But Roy never defended himself. He just kept dismantling, labeling, and saving what everyone else threw away. Let me tell you about 1982, because that is when the world turned upside down for the farmers of Hardin County. You know the history of the farm crisis. Interest rates shot up to 21.5%. Corn prices completely collapsed, and land values dropped by 60%, almost overnight. Debt that had seemed easily manageable at 9% interest became an absolute nightmare at 20%. Between 1982 and 1987, hundreds of thousands of American farms defaulted on their loans and lost everything. But there is a crucial piece of the farm crisis that does not get told often enough, and that is the story about the spare parts. When the financial crisis hit, the very first thing farmers stopped buying was new equipment. Tractor sales in Iowa dropped 40% between 1980 and 1983. Combine sales fell off an absolute cliff. The farmers who were barely surviving were doing it by stretching every single piece of equipment they had as far as it would possibly go. They quickly figured out that you could put a lot of repairs into an old machine for what it costs to buy a brand new one. That simple realization changed Roy Hassel's life forever. Because when farmers stop buying new tractors, they start fixing their old ones. And when they start fixing old machines, they desperately need parts. Merle Gustafson and his shiny John Deere dealership were slowly dying. His new tractor sales plummeted from 22 units in 1979 down to just 4 units in 1983. By 1985, he sold exactly 0 new tractors in the entire county. Not a single one. Merle desperately tried to survive on parts and service, but even that revenue stream was shrinking rapidly. Farmers were deferring their maintenance, doing their own repairs in their barns, and looking for any alternative to paying full retail price. In August of 1985, Merle Gustafson was forced to close his dealership permanently. 28 years of proud business were gone in a flash. The big glass showroom was completely empty. The service bay doors were heavily padlocked. The polished parts counter, where Merle had stood and loudly mocked Roy Hassel's Junkyard for 15 years, was now completely bare. Suddenly, every single farmer in Hardin County who needed a replacement part for a tractor that was 10 or 15 or 20 years old had absolutely nowhere to go. The nearest remaining dealer was down in Marshalltown, which was a 45-minute drive each way, and even that dealership did not stock parts for the older models anymore. They only stocked components for the brand new machines that absolutely nobody was buying. The county was in a state of total panic. The fall harvest was rapidly approaching, and broken tractors were sitting uselessly in the fields. The proud men who had spent 2 decades laughing at the quiet farmer with his ravine full of dead iron were suddenly realizing that their expensive modern system had completely failed them. They needed a lifeline to keep their family farms running through the darkest financial period in history. Let me tell you about the moment it became personal, because that is the exact moment the junkyard farmer officially became the undisputed king of Hardin County. The first desperate neighbor showed up on a Tuesday morning in September of 1985. His name was Gene Brewer, and his farm, all 706, had a failed fuel injector. With Merle's dealership permanently closed and the next town over completely out of stock, Gene was facing a ruined harvest. He stood in the doorway of Roy's barn looking at the endless rows of labeled parts, the way a sick man looks at a well-stocked pharmacy. Roy simply walked to the second shelf, reached into a specific coffee can, and handed Gene a perfectly clean and tested fuel injector. He charged them exactly $12 for a replacement that would have cost $68 brand new. By Christmas of 1985, Roy Hassel had supplied crucial mechanical components to 37 different farmers across 3 entire counties. He sold hydraulic pumps, power takeoff shafts, alternators, and steering cylinders for whatever those struggling men could afford to pay. While the modern corporate system was completely failing them, Roy's meticulous inventory of discarded iron was single-handedly keeping the family farms of the county running. He was no longer the town joke. He was their absolute savior and their only lifeline. But the ultimate satisfaction, the legendary moment that proved 20 years of quiet stubbornness, arrived in March of 1986. A familiar blue pickup truck slowly pulled into Roy's gravel driveway. The faded outline of a peeled-off logo on the door read, "Gustafson Implement." Merle Gustafson, the arrogant salesman who had mocked Roy publicly, who had called his farm an eyesore, and who had tried to get the county authorities to shut him down, stepped out of the truck. Merle was farming a small piece of ground himself now, and his John Deere 4020 had blown a vital steering cylinder. The only surviving dealer who stocked the replacement wanted $185 for it. The wealthy man who had sold parts at a massive markup for 28 years suddenly could not afford to fix his own machine. Merle walked into the barn he had so deeply despised. He looked at the thousands of perfectly cataloged parts and swallowed his immense pride. He asked Roy if he had a steering cylinder for his John Deere. Roy did not smile. He did not boast or demand any kind of apology. He calmly walked to his second storage shed, pulled back a protective canvas tarp, and produced the exact steering cylinder Merle needed. When Merle asked the price, Roy quietly told him it was $20. Merle's hands were physically shaking as he handed over a $20 bill to the very man he had called the junkyard farmer. Before Merle could leave, Roy delivered a heavy lesson that the former dealer would never forget. Roy told him that he never collected these dead machines to prove anyone wrong. He collected them because he always knew that a discarded piece of iron is only considered junk until the exact moment you desperately need it to survive. And when that moment finally comes, that piece of junk becomes the most valuable thing in the entire world. Merle Gustafson drove away in absolute silence, completely humiliated but deeply grateful to the king of the ravine.
Let me ask you something and take your time with this one. What makes a machine turn into junk? The engineers today build equipment with sealed modules and black boxes. They tell you to simply replace the entire expensive unit when one tiny internal piece fails. But Roy Hassel understood something the factory engineers completely forgot. A part is something you can actually hold in your hand clean with a rag and test on a workbench. When you understand the individual parts, you understand the entire machine. And when you understand the machine, you never have to depend on an arrogant dealer to tell you what is worth saving. Junk is only junk until the exact second you desperately need it to survive the season. Roy did not just collect dead iron. He collected the life that other men threw away because they were too proud to get their hands dirty.
Let me ask you something and take your time with this one. What makes a machine turn into junk? The engineers today build equipment with sealed modules and black boxes. They tell you to simply replace the entire expensive unit when one tiny internal piece fails. But Roy Hassel understood something the factory engineers completely forgot. A part is something you can actually hold in your hand clean with a rag and test on a workbench. When you understand the individual parts, you understand the entire machine. And when you understand the machine, you never have to depend on an arrogant dealer to tell you what is worth saving. Junk is only junk until the exact second you desperately need it to survive the season. Roy did not just collect dead iron. He collected the life that other men threw away because they were too proud to get their hands dirty. Now, before we finish, I want to share a small secret with you. While the careful genius and the stubborn spirit of this tale beat in the heart of every rural American town, the specific names and events like Roy and his meticulous coffee cans are a carefully crafted legend. It is a fictional tribute dedicated to the countless quiet farmers across this country who save what others eagerly throw away and build their own salvation from the scrapyard. If you believe in the undeniable genius of the American farmer and the absolute value of old iron, please hit that like button and subscribe to The Farm Legacy. Go down to the comments right now and tell me if you have ever kept a piece of so-called junk that ended up saving the day when modern technology failed. Until next time, always remember that the most valuable tools are sometimes the ones everyone else left behind.